Our lives are filled with individual acts. We're always doing something, and every single day we're doing hundreds, if not thousands, of actions. I'm doing an action right now. You're doing an action. And these acts are what St. Thomas Aquinas is concerned about in this treatise, which is the treatise on human acts. Acts peculiar to man. It means it's something that is unique to us in that we have, for example, counsel. All right, irrational animals don't have counsel, and angels don't have to counsel. God certainly doesn't have to counsel. So this is something that's unique to us. And so what St. Thomas Aquinas is doing in these particular articles in the Summa is doing a very specific kind of dissection of human acts. And we've already talked about choice. We talked about intention. Previously, we had talked about circumstances and how all these are important when considering whether an action is good or bad. So these articles, these questions are important as we get ready later in the Summa to get into moral actions. What makes something good? What makes something bad? In fact, we'll be doing that here in the next week or so. And there's 6 articles in this question on counsel. And, when we think of counseling, we think of, going to a counselor. I've certainly done that several times in my life because you want advice. You want somebody else to give you some particular advice about what Thomas is going to call, particulars, singulars, contingencies. It means we could go in different directions, but we want to know what's the right thing to do. And so that's what counsel is going to be about. The first article says whether counsel is an inquiry. And he says, counsel follows the judgment of the reason about what is to be done. Now, there is much uncertainty in things that have to be done. All right, we all know that's the case because actions are concerned with contingent singulars, which by reason of their vicissitude are uncertain. Now, in things doubtful and uncertain, the reason does not pronounce judgment without previous inquiry, wherefore the reason must of necessity institute an inquiry before deciding on the objects of choice, and this inquiry is called counsel. Hence, Aristotle says that choice is the desire of what has been already counseled. So we learned about choice yesterday. It has to do with the means. Before one makes a choice, they counsel. They look into the different options because there are a lot of contingencies and there's different directions that we can go in things. And so it makes sense to, either counsel ourselves or else bring somebody else into the picture as well. Number 2 article, whether counsel is of the end or only of the means. Now we learned that choice is of the means. The end is kind of set. We all seek happiness. We seek the good. We seek God. But God has allowed us to have free will, so we have a lot of contingencies, and we can make choices about that. The end is the principle in practical matters because the reason of the means is to be found in the end. Now, the principle cannot be called in question, but must be presupposed in every inquiry. Since, therefore, counsel is an inquiry, it is not of the end, but of the means. Nevertheless, it may happen that what is of the end in regard to some things is ordained to something else, just as also what is the principle of one demonstration is the conclusion of another. And consequently, that which is looked upon as the end in one inquiry may be looked upon as the means in another, and thus it will become an object of counsel. So I sharpen a pencil in order to do a math problem, right? So in that particular case, the end is the writing the math problem. But I do the math problem in order to do my assignment. I do my assignment to pass the class. I pass the class to graduate. I graduate to get a job. So you can see there's a kind of a stair step. And so what may appear to be the end actually is another means to get to where you're trying to get. Article 3 says whether counsel is only of things that we do. Now, as I mentioned, we do things all the time. We're constantly doing things. And I love because in this case, Thomas is going to make a distinction between universals and what he calls contingent singulars, individual actions versus principles or universals that we act upon. Counsel properly implies a conference held between several. The word concilium denotes this, for it means sitting together, in Latin, considium, from the fact that many sit together in order to confer with one another. Now, we must take note that in contingent particular cases, in order that anything be known for certain, it is necessary to take several conditions or circumstances into consideration, which is not easy for one to consider. but are considered by several with greater certainty. So he's saying, hey, it's nice every now and then to bring somebody else into the conversation, get advice from somebody else, since what one takes note of escapes the notice of another. This is why, just as a side note, a lot of counselors rely on Aquinas, for psychology, probably even psychiatry, and analyzing the human person, because he's such an expert on the human person and the way we come to decisions, like what he's talking about here. Whereas in necessary and universal things, our view is brought to bear on matters much more absolute and simple, so that one man may by himself be sufficient to consider these things. Whereas the inquiry of counsel is concerned, properly speaking, with contingent singulars, individual actions. Now, the knowledge of the truth in such matters does not rank so high as to be desirable of itself, as is the knowledge of things universal and necessary, but it is desired as being useful towards action, because actions bear on things contingent and singular. Consequently, properly speaking, counsel is about things done by us. So, again, he's making the distinction between the universal, the big picture, and then individual actions that we do on a daily basis. Whether counsel is about things that we do. Now, it sounds like he's repeating the same question. We just had, is it only things that we do? Now, this one he's saying, is it about all the things that we do? Now, every single action, without failure. And he's going to say, no, there are some instances where counsel is not necessary. Counsel is a kind of inquiry, but we are wont to inquire about things that admit of doubt. Hence, the process of inquiry, which is called an argument, is a reason that attests something that admitted of doubt. Okay, he's actually quoting Cicero there. Now, that something in relation to human acts admits of doubt arises from twofold source. First, because certain determinate ends are gained by certain determinate means, as happen in the arts, which are governed by certain fixed rules of action. So he's giving examples here of things that don't really fall under doubt. Like, you don't have to counsel, you don't really have a choice. It's more kind of set. He says, a writer does not take counsel how to form his letters, for this is determined by art. Secondly, from the fact that it in little matters whether it is done this way or that. This occurs in minute matters, which help or hinder but little with regard to the end aimed at, and reason looks upon small things as mere nothings. Okay, little things. I'm going to scratch my head. I'm going to, rub my chin. I mean, these are things that you don't have to take counsel for. Consequently, there are two things of which we do not take counsel, though they conduce to the end, namely minute things and those things which have a fixed way of being done, right? So that's kind of interesting. So not every single action is going to have, something that we have to seek counsel or really take too seriously. Whether the process of counsel is one of analysis. Now, I love this because he's going to get into some terminology here. If you're a fan of philosophy and you've studied David Hume or Immanuel Kant, and they talk about synthetic and analytic and, different, categories in the mind and all the epistemology. This is a short paragraph, but it uses some of this language, so I think we need to pay attention to it. In every inquiry, one must begin from some principle. And if this principle proceeds both in knowledge and in being, the process is not analytic, but synthetic. Okay, again, this is the same language that Kant is going to use centuries later, because to proceed from cause to effect is to proceed synthetically, since causes are more simple than effects. But if that which proceeds in knowledge is later in the order of being, the process is one of analysis, as when our judgments deal with effects. Now, you may know that Scottish empiricist David Hume denied causality. All right, so even though this doesn't 100% make sense to me right here, this is important because he is talking about cause and effect. He is talking about synthetic and analytic, judgments and propositions, and so this plays into this. I'm pretty certain. Okay. When our judgment deals with effects, which by analysis we trace to their simple causes. Now, the principle of this inquiry of counsel is the end, which proceeds in deed and intention, but comes afterwards into execution. Hence, the inquiry of counsel must needs be one of analysis, beginning, that is to say, from that which is intended in the future and continuing until it arrives at that which is to be done at once. All right, I'm going to leave it at that because this run through of the Summa, we're not stopping every single time. We get a little bit confused, but I just want to reiterate that there's something important there. There's something important there about cause and effect and these different types of judgment. Article 6, whether the process of counsel is indefinite. The inquiry of counsel is actually finite on both sides, on that of its principle and that of its term. For a twofold principle is available in the inquiry of counsel. One is proper to it and belongs to the very genus of the things pertaining to operation. Okay, operation. This is the end which is not the matter of counsel, but is taken for granted as its principle. Okay, so there's certain principles that we of necessity adhere to. But again, remember, universal versus particular. He's getting at this again. The other principle is taken from another genus, so to speak. Thus, in demonstrative sciences, one science postulates certain things from another without inquiring into them. Now, these principles, which are taken for granted in the inquiry of counsel, are any facts received through the senses. For instance, that this is bread or iron. Now, this is so interesting because this is the same stuff that's going to be called into question by people like George Berkeley and David Hume, certainly Descartes. Can we trust our senses? Thomas is saying this is just taken for granted that we can trust our senses. This is a couple centuries later is going to be very much challenged. And also any general statements known either through speculative or through practical science. For instance, that adultery is forbidden by God, or that man cannot live without suitable nourishment. Okay, so Thomas is saying that basically there's a natural law that some things are forbidden by God, and therefore they're principles that we have to obey. This will be called into question in centuries to come. Of such things, counsel makes no inquiry. But the term of inquiry is that which we are able to do at once. For just as the end is considered in the light of a principle, so the means are considered in the light of a conclusion. Wherefore, that which presents itself as to be done first holds the position of an ultimate conclusion, whereas the inquiry comes to an end. Nothing, however, prevents counsel from being infinite potentially, for as much as an infinite number of things may present themselves to be inquired into by means of counsel. Okay, this is good stuff. And again, I've said it many times, these videos are an introduction. Maybe we'll go over these another time once we've gone through the whole Summa and dig a little deeper. But I think the important thing we get out of this is that counsel has to do with the means. It precedes choice. Choice is a means to an end. The end is set. The end is happiness. The end is beatitude ultimately. That's where we're being directed. But God has given us free will, and so we make choices. We have contingencies. And counsel goes into that. But counsel is related to individual actions, but based on universal principles. I think that's what he's getting at here. All right. Well, my phone is ringing, so I better go. But thank you for joining me. God bless you.